Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining after a long weekend. I hope everybody had an enjoyable 4 days. I want to talk a little bit today about culture and engagement. As Gareth said, had 20-year career, human resources. Unfortunately, I've had to lead in a number of difficult and trying times, whether it was a global financial crisis, whether it was 9/11 in the United States, or other issues around the world. So I wanted to pass along some of those learnings, some of the things that science of human behavior tells us that is useful for people to do from an engagement perspective during these times, and then talk a little bit about the world coming up. So I will share my screen here. I'll move that into presentation mode. And I will go back up because I was editing on the fly right before. The title of this presentation was Building Culture in a Crisis. And as I thought about it over the weekend, I really moved away from the question of culture and talked really about engagement. And really the things that I wanted to cover today, some leadership lessons that past crises have taught us, and people that have studied them have taught us, I think could be useful for people to learn from now. Talk about the 4 engagement questions I think you need in a crisis. It's only 4 that I think can help you understand where your people are at and how they're doing. And then talk a little bit about some must-dos and how-tos. And here's where I hope we can use the Q&A button to really focus in on some things that are pertinent to you that are joining. Obviously, we do this. I do this presentation a little bit in a vacuum, so I'm hoping this is where we can get a dialogue and a conversation going about things that are relevant to you and your current situations. And then a little bit of a slide about what I think happens after COVID-19 and thinking about engagement on a go-forward basis. This presentation will be shared, and there's some resources at the end of it that I've also included for you that I'll reference throughout it. So if you're interested in what we talk about today, there's some more material in the presentation that will be circulated later. One of these things about engagement, and I think this is not just about an issue for today in the situation that we're in, but also on a go-forward basis. It's clear from the data that businesses where people are engaged in its mission, engaged in what is happening, are more profitable, more productive, have lower turnover, lower absenteeism, lower safety incidences. And so this is something I think, well, COVID-19 has brought a forefront because it's changed our way of working, whether it's people in remote work, full shutdowns, or some partial in between. I think it's something I would encourage people to think about on a go-forward basis, even after this passes. So a couple things I want to talk about that I think we have to accept when we're in the middle of a crisis or in a situation like this where things are changing quite rapidly, is that for the people that you work with or work for you, their experiences can be very different from individual to individual, and they can be changing from day to day or from week to week. What's happening within families, what's happening within extended families, et cetera, those things can change all the time. It's also a fact of time that we're going to have to try new things. We're going to have to learn from them, and we're going to have to iterate our way forward and figuring out what works. And then my final 2 things really to kind of hone in on is, in unprecedented times, mistakes will happen. But if I gave one of the 1 takeaways I hope people take away from this topic is being human as a leader and being human in how you treat people and how you work with them is never one of those mistakes. And so it's one of the things that throughout my own personal career and throughout my career in working with individuals, it's been something I've always fallen back on, and it's never steered me wrong. And then finally, make sure you take time for yourself. It's a stressful time for everybody, especially if it's your own business and you're trying to figure out what's gonna happen. Make sure you take some time for yourself and take care of yourself. And you may not have seen that, but this morning, Icehouse Ventures has invested in this, and I'm also a board member, so for full disclosure. But we've made the Mentomia mental health app free to all New Zealanders this morning. It's in the Google store. It's in the Apple App Store. Feel free to download it, take a look at it. it may provide a resource for you or for your teams that could be useful. So when we talk about engagement and we talk about what's going on, and really I'm focused on employees here, not beyond just what's happening within their own business, the competition around engagement is also the headlines, right? And so this is just my quick snapshot of some of the headlines over the last week. And these are the things that are also weighing on people's minds. And so as you think about a crisis, also think and realize that it's not only what's happening within your own business or what people are thinking about what's happening within your own business, their ability to stay engaged, their ability to think about what they are working on is influenced greatly by what happens around them and what they're going to fear about what's going to happen in the future. The other thing that I think that's interesting for us all to look forward to here right now is April 20th. That's a date that the government has stated that they'll state their plans for what happens on level 4, whether it extends, whether we decrease to level 3, or if you're reading articles this morning of epidemiologists asking to go to level 2 immediately. But people are going to start looking forward and ahead right about now. And the 20th, I think, is a date, at least the people I talk to, that a lot of people are circling right now to understand what's going on. And so your employees are going to be thinking about that too, especially if you're in a full shutdown or you're in some kind of in a partial work arrangement. What's the world going to look like, come April 22? And they're going to extrapolate out of what they see in that daily call at 1 p.m. So through all this, through the things that are in the headlines, people looking forward, is there lessons from the past that we can draw upon? I think about what people want and what people need. And Gallup, which is a global organization and studies sentiment and employees' reactions, has looked over the last 80 odd years of what's transpired in the world from a crisis perspective. And what do people look for in those environments? And really it boils down to 4 things. It's trust, it's compassion, it's stability, and it's hope. And it's also really incredible in that story, in that study, is that leaders, managers, whoever who try to exhibit those behaviors can rally their people and move them through issues faster. And so this doesn't mean that with stability and hope that you create false stories about where the business is going, but it is about helping people understand what is the path, even if it's unknown, helping to continue things for people that may be standard within your workplace that can be done remotely, treating people with compassion, back to my point about being human, and then this idea of trust, of just being as transparent and candid with people as you can. And if you can do those kind of 4 things, you're going to have a higher probability of your workforce being engaged through a crisis. And quite frankly, you're going to have a higher, even without a crisis, them being engaged. And so one of the questions I think is, how do you know how well you're doing against these types of 4 things? And really, it kind of boils down to 4 questions. And so if you're working with people in your company, or if it's in a full shutdown, and you're wondering how people are feeling, how they're thinking about the relationship with the company or your organization, these kind of 4 questions are simple ones to ask. You can do that in survey form. They can be done one-on-one. But they're proven within the data and the science to really give you an understanding of what people's sentiment is. And so the idea is, do people think there's a clear plan of action? Do they feel well prepared to do their job? I think especially important with the amount of remote work going on. Are they kept informed of what is going on, good, bad, or even if the story is nothing has changed? And do they feel like the organization cares about their well-being? Now, to the right here, I put a strongly agree, neutral, disagree, and that's, if you were to do it in a survey format, that's the way you could ask people to articulate their agreement or lack of agreement with those statements. But I think these kind of 4 simple questions are things to ask people if you're wondering about how engaged they're staying throughout this COVID-19 and the level 4 lockdown, and even what happens with level 3. I think these are clear, simple 4 questions you can ask. So before we get to kind of Q&A here, just a couple other things. These are kind of what I think are the must-dos of engagement. One is obviously communication. I think everybody understands about being proactive, anticipating, trying to create as frequent, candid, personal communications as possible. The one thing I did want to talk about here is this concept of two-way communications. Studies around social media, studies around these environments, you want people to respond in some way to the communications you do. Whether that's an acknowledgement, whether that's a like, whether that's if you have a remote workforce, people are, have done some crazy things online with Instagram and other stories. But getting people to engage in two-way communications is incredibly important. One-way communications that are just emails about the status of a business are very good and very good starts. But if you want to keep people engaged, you have to figure out a way to get them to respond. And so it's just one thing I really wanted to highlight there. When you're in a environment like COVID, making sure people know health and safety is at the top of your agenda is super important. So whether that's people in a workplace now as an essential work, whether it's about what's the return to the workplace going to be like after level 4, et cetera, people knowing that you care about health and safety, as we all do, and we're explicit about it, is extremely important. And the final two things is, and I think most people understand it, but really the studies and when you look around the world, the things that go towards engagement, help and provide resources to people for their personal challenges. So here in New Zealand, the government's been great with the amount of resources that are online for people, mental health, the wage subsidy program, et cetera. Making sure we take those challenges for people seriously and we provide them real resources is incredibly important. What that might mean within your own business will be varied. If it's remote work, how do you help people do remote work as easy as possible, et cetera, but super important. And then finally is give people a voice. So this builds on the idea of two-way communications, but figure out a way to give people a voice, to give you feedback, give you input on what's happening, to ask questions that they might need answers to ask hard questions about where they think the future is going. And if the answer is people don't know, I think that's fine. I think that the act of people being able to ask and get an answer is really what you're looking for. So, and I talk a little bit about remote workers, and then I think, Gareth, we can see if there's any Q&A around remote and maybe talk about that here, or else we keep going. But if you're in an environment where your workforce has gone remote or a portion of your workforce has gone remote, here, some of the things that I would ask you to consider with those people is on this page. And for the most part, I don't really want to go through them bullet by bullet because I figure most people can read them. The things that I would talk about is make sure you continue to celebrate wins no matter how small. Making people feel like they're contributing and they're putting points on the board to move the business forward even during this time is incredibly important. The other one is about replacing informal communication. And so what I mean by that is there's a lot that happens within an office environment, as we all know, whether it's grabbing a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, whether it's going out to lunch with people, whether it's even that discussion at the end of the day in the parking lot. We have to work harder when we're working remote to recreate those experiences, because those experiences really bind people together and bind people in a mission. And so what I've seen some teams do is they've created informal Zoom chats where people can just come in basically with a cup of coffee and chat and connect in the morning. There's always open every day from 9 to 10 a.m. I've seen people change staff meetings to be focused about telling their story about what's happening during lockdown more than being business status updates and business as normal. And there's other people who have implemented WhatsApp groups, Snapchat groups, etc. But figuring out ways to connect people and allow them to discuss things other than the status of projects all the time, I think is incredibly important at this time. And I think those are two things I think are really important for remote workers. The other one, just to be super clear, changing performance measures in a crisis, people understanding how they're going to be measured is on people's minds, especially when they're thinking about that there may be job losses. So making sure you're clear about that and communicate that to people is super important. How you prioritize work, I think, is incredibly important for people at this time. Prioritizing exactly what's important and deprioritizing things that can wait. I've seen lots of companies change their hours of work as we're all trying to balance having children lots of people balancing having children at home versus not. I've seen companies change the times that they want people to work and being open to that and being explicit about that. So Gareth, I mean, for here, is there any questions in the Q&A about remote work?
There's a few on a couple. One thing I'd like to, one of the questions around that app that you mentioned, the app's called, I'm going to find it quite hard. Yeah, Mentomia, thank you. It's Italian. Yep. It means Italian for good mental health, I believe.
It's Italian for my mind.
My mind. So I've put a link to some info on that on the Zoom chat part, not the Q&A, so everyone can see that. Also, that's on the App Store, and it's on normal apps, iPhone, and also on Android. So you just search that in the App Store. And I watched an interview this morning with John Cohen, and he said it's the best way to download. So yeah, that's great. Another thing, Kate McKenzie, thanks Kate for your question, has asked, what if you have set up two avenues for two-way communication, but people are just not engaged with it? So have you got any suggestions on how people can be a bit more engaged with that, the communication two-way, online, etc.?
Yeah, so what I've done in the past when that hasn't happened is I've done a couple different things. One is if I know of some people on my team that, for lack of a better term, are opinion leaders, are well connected with individuals, I actually just approach them one-on-one and ask them, explain to them what I'm trying to achieve with that two-way communication and the challenge that I'm seeing with getting people to react and ask for their opinion about what's happening, right? Usually, in my experience, it comes down to one of two things. It's either the content and how it's being presented, or the mechanism by which people can respond isn't simple enough for them. But I think just asking a couple key people about, here's what I'm trying to achieve, here's the results I'm seeing, what do you think we can do to make it better? Because I really care about making it better. I think will give you a ton of great ideas. That's what I've done the most. A simple thing, just to build on that, if you don't know what to communicate to people, I think it's three simple questions to ask people. What do you want to hear about? What do you want to hear about? How do you want to hear about it? And how often do you want to hear about it? And usually people will answer those three questions for you, and it will give you a very easy roadmap, and will also help you with that two-way dialogue.
Yeah. Do you think that there's a way to give the employee a voice, in a sense of helping them to speak up more using tech, etc.? Is there better ways than others?
Look, I think there are ways that people interact are different, right? There's people like myself who are introverts who I'm not the first guy to speak up in a meeting. I'm happy to text, but I'm not the first guy to speak up in a meeting. And so you need to understand that Sometimes, like for example, if you have if your communication channel is a broadcast to the entire company, there are just people who won't be comfortable responding in that environment. And so you have to mix things up. You can start smaller chat groups with people. You can start smaller Zoom conversations with people. You can have big, broad versions. But you're going to have to, the question isn't the technology. The question is about mixing up sizes of groups, who's in the group, when you do it, how you do it. All those things can be mixed up and change over time to keep evolving.
Yeah.
And you just gotta keep experimenting.
A second ago, you said about the 3 things you keep on asking employees. What were they again?
What do you want to know? How do you want to know it? And how often do you want to hear about it?
Yeah.
And that'll give you a lot of the information you need to know about topics you should be talking about. Some people will tell you they want video. Some people will tell you want email. Some people will tell you like, I don't need to hear it at all. I'm good. Because there are some people like that, right? They're fine.
Oh, I mean, we started very well at the Icehouse. We started having bookend meetings at the beginning and end of the day. And then after a week of that, it was just everyone was open and said, actually, we probably only need one check-in a day that's actually more specific on things. And that, we're all getting more out of that now. And now we're having an evening one at the end of the week as kind of the drinks catch up just to make sure everyone's okay. And it's now become the new normal, even though we're 3 weeks into it. And I think everyone's slowly found a way around it. And I mean, Zoom's something that, I Zoomed my parents last night, and my dad, by the end of the hour conversation, just started to get that when he was green, he could speak. Before then, he was kind of trying to constantly, he was on like a pause button, and then we was like, Dad, just speak. But it's different. People found it harder to speak on these kind of things than others.
People care about being asked for their opinion.
Yeah.
They care about you trying to deliver against that opinion. And I think people are then okay with experimentation of trying new ways over time. And I think if you do those kind of 3 things, I think it's in good shape.
That's good. Someone just said, Glenn McCarty just said, Lion is good. L for last week, I for issues, O for opportunities, and N for next week. I think that's really great.
Yep.
An anonymous question. John, I saw you talk about some really interesting insights Harvard recently came up with around culture development and hiring. Could you share some of these, please? Did you just ask that question, John?
No, I did not, but I think I know who Anonymous is. Because I only shared that article with like about 10 people this weekend. So. That's a longer conversation. I'll put a link to the article in the document I send out. For me, it's a wickedly interesting article, but basically a group of researchers studied language and people, and they talked about, to nut it down, is people talk about cultural fit when they're hiring, right? Do they fit our culture?
Yeah.
And really what those studies found is you want to find people who can adapt over time to the way the culture needs to be for where your business is at, right? So cultural adaptability is actually almost more important than, this idea of cultural fit. And the reason cultural adaptability is really important is because it'll force you, it will make you more open-minded to a variety of people to be hired, which gives you a variety of ideas, gives you thought diversity, and which has been shown to help you with ideation and other types of innovation as a company. So, and it's something I've always argued against, is you don't hire for cultural fit, you hire for people that can kind of get aligned with your culture. And that, the same word as adaptability. So hopefully I answered Anonymous's question.
That Anonymous was the anonymous Andy Hamilton.
I knew that.
Yeah, I think we all did in a way.
Yeah.
When you said earlier about celebrating wins, I'm all for that, being in sales. But they can be anything, I guess, in the sense of a win. It could be, because businesses are having to change. So what a win for a salesperson in my role or in another industry is now slightly different, I guess, or is supporting businesses. So, other industries where they're still online and they're managing to do things they can celebrate differently. I guess dwelling on that is that you have to reassess what the wins are for your business, I guess.
Yeah, and I think, if it's to give you one piece of advice, I'd celebrate the wins that are about the behaviors you want to see more of, right? So if you want
Yeah.
people coming up with new ideas, and celebrate when someone comes up with a new idea, whether it's the best idea in the face of the planet or not, doesn't really matter,
No.
right? Like people people are smart. They will do what gets rewarded. So double down on the reward and the stuff you want to see more of, and it will come. So, and I think when the other part I talk about, this is super hard, right? Like, uh, and I talk about this with businesses and especially founders and tech companies a lot, is um, while their eye is on the prize of launching the product, etc. And for them, that's the win. For the people working for you, the win might be, hey, I closed that one account, right? So celebrate the wins that mean a lot to that person in their job,
Mm.
that are delivering on the promise of what you want the company to do, right?
Yeah.
And starving people of recognition until they hit the big win, I just don't think it's a good idea. I think people run out of energy. So
Especially when you're on your own
yeah,
in
yeah,
some aspects doing
yeah.
it, keeping
So do
people.
you want me to keep going here? So, because I know
Just one.
I'm
I
watching
mean,
time.
any other questions keep coming in. I've got another couple of questions that we can keep to the end.
You
Yeah,
want to
maybe
shoot? Yeah,
keep
we can
going.
do that.
Yeah, yeah, keep going.
Okay. Um, Obviously, for now, there might be people that are in a shutdown. Um, Look at the three things that I think are super important is checking in on well-being of people every couple of days, whether by text, by phone, by email, but making sure even if those people aren't coming into the office and there's no work for them, that you're checking in on them. I know my daughter works a part-time job. They keep checking in with her. And I think that you can see the impact on her own experience with that employer in doing that, right? Even though the status of nothing has changed with her and everything's good, the fact that people care and they're reaching out is super important. Um, the other thing too is remember that people are looking ahead, so you got to anticipate and communicate. People are going to be worried about their jobs. They want to get back to work. If they're on wage subsidy, they're wondering when they get back to their hours, and so they're looking at the end of this 4-week shutdown, et cetera. So that April 20th date that I talked about earlier is super important. Um, and then I think continuing to communicate the status of the business, even if nothing has changed, is super important. So um, people are always going to fill in gaps in communication, whatever the worst case scenario is. And so you need to continue to be in front of them. And even if everything's good with your business, even though if it's in full shutdown, or if you unfortunately don't know what the status is going to be, letting people know that, so they don't make up stories and they know that they're being you're thinking about them and looking after their well-being and looking after their livelihood to the best degree you can. And then finally, I just want to talk a little bit, two slides here about managers. So if you're a large enough company and you have managers that work for you or in your business, how can they help you keep people engaged? So a couple things here at the top is just remember their employees too. I've worked in places where we kind of forget the managers have families and their employees, and they have their own issues, and we keep driving them and treating them differently than we treat everybody else. So just remember to do the things that we just talked about with employees. Make sure you do that with managers. They're great sources of feedback, and they're probably going to get some different stories than what you'll get. And so figuring out a way to connect with them on some kind of regular basis is incredibly important. In terms of what managers can do to help you, I think it's a really good opportunity to let them know this isn't the time to be the boss. It's a time to be human and connect with people, making sure they're touching base with their people every 1 to 2 days. And it's a time for them to figure out, if you're in remote work or you have time where you have people doing things that you haven't had an opportunity to get to. I have a friend whose business that they're cleaning up their CRM system, et cetera. During this time, it's okay to give people a shot at new projects. It's a great opportunity if you're looking for new ideas on what to do with your business after this, or ways you can streamline the organization. It's an awesome opportunity for them to go do that with their people. And so showing people that you're still investing in them, you're still trying to develop them, you still care about their growth, is a great way that managers can help you right now. And it's a way for you to make that happen. My one caveat on that is, especially around brainstorming, is don't have people brainstorm on things that you don't want to accept new ideas on. That's a really bad idea. Like, if you're going to shoot everything down, you might as well not have done it. But if you're open to it and you want their input and ideas, even if they get modified over time, it's a great opportunity to work with people right now.
Do you think that some businesses are going to be finding it obviously quite hard at the moment, and they know that some parts of the business might have to change, or the severity is bad for the business? Do you think it's best being honest to the employees who have multiple staff, to say, the owner's being open to them early doors to help that culture continued? Or, is there any advice you can give someone who thinks that they might have to make some changes within the business?
Yeah, I think I've always fallen back on how would I want to be treated in that situation.
Yeah.
And I would be open and candid with people. Now, so the debate is when you do it, I think, more than if you do it.
Yep.
If you do it too early without enough data about what's going to happen, you can cause a lot of fear, right? Because there's some questions you need to answer. If you wait too late, then I think you're in a process where it looks disingenuous at best. So my point to people would be is how would you want, if the roles were reversed, when would you want to know and what would you want to know? And I think if you can answer those questions, then I think it's the right time, and have those answers, that's the right time to do it.
Yep.
And that's the adage I live by.
Yeah, great. One other question regarding people's development. What kind of development will best help employees to kind of shift the way that they make meaning to the business?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question.
I guess so how can they help people to develop the way that they change their thinking around how they're helping the business to continue?
Right. So I would just state two things. One is, here's, if you have a clear idea or general direction of how you want the business to evolve, I would give them that problem and go like, how can you help me in making that a reality? Yeah. Right. I think too often, and this is something I talk to a lot of people, I think too often in crisis environments, and it's human nature, you want to help give everybody a solution. And I actually think in this environment, it's better to say, here's the challenge, here's the things I've thought about. How can you help me think about other ideas or ways to do those things differently? Right. And, and if you have specific guardrails about things that you just won't change, for example, like, we're never going to be a fully online business. It's just not going to happen. Okay, we'll just tell people that. That's fine. but within that constraint, how can you help me do what we want to go do?
Mm.
And I it sounds super simple. It's wicked hard to do, because it takes a lot of courage to hand over, right? You're handing over a bunch of responsibility to people, but the reality is once you've hired people, you've handed over a bunch of responsibility anyway. So you should just, you may be surprised at what you get back.
Mm. Great. So we've got a few more minutes left. You've got a few more slides, I believe.
I think I've got one more slide. So I think one more slide, because I just like putting pictures in, and I couldn't find puppies. But anyway, I mean, at some point, this is going to pass. Level 4 is going to pass. Level 3 will pass, and we'll be into some world. I don't want to say post-COVID, but there'll be some world where we're things are starting to go again, and you're seeing articles about that. What's the new normal going to look like? What's it mean for international travel? What does it mean for tourism, etc.? But in any way, there's going to be some kind of new normal, right? And I think this is where I hope that people take some of the learnings, the lessons, the motivation in these 4 weeks. They take them forward with their businesses, right? Because if we go back to the slide in the beginning, highly engaged businesses outperform. Full stop. I mean, it's unequivocal. Highly engaged businesses outperform. And we know what it takes to get people engaged, right? Trust, compassion, stability, hope, those types of things from leaders. And so what I hope in a new normal is people keep communicating, but make sure it's two-way, right? Get people a voice, get them input. I think it's going to be incredibly important. I talked about this already, about asking what they want to hear, how they want to hear it, etc. Continue to measure engagement. There's lots of online tools out there that there's lots of people that'll sell you things like Peakon, Culture Amp, etc. I don't have an opinion one way or another on that, but if you want the number 8 wire to kind of do an engagement survey, fire up Google Forms, fire up SurveyMonkey, and then use Gallup's Q12. And in the deck that we send out, the Q12 questions are in the appendix, so you can use those, and you can just use those on your own to measure how people feel about your business and where they're at. And you can then take from there action items, and then you measure again, rinse and repeat. The other thing I would say too is, I would personally be doing 2 reviews within 30 days of a business getting back to whatever semblance of normal is. I'd get people's input on the 4-week quarantine, the plus delta, what worked well, what didn't work well, see what you learn out of that. It's another way to give people a voice and give people input. And I would ask people, especially if you've done things like the question earlier about 2-way communication mechanisms, like ask people, hey, what are the things that we started doing that you really liked? Should we continue doing them or not? What things did we do what things did we do in the past, or things that we did that didn't work so great that we should stop? And what things should we definitely, double down on, et cetera, moving forward?
Mm.
I think those 2 things will give you, it's an interesting way to reset a business after what, is everybody understandably is a big disruption, but I think gets people centered back on, back into a common purpose, a common mission, etc., on a go forward basis. And it gives you as a leader or a manager really rich data to just deliver on what people ask for and need. And when you do that, they get engaged, and then it all works from there. So that would be my kind of after COVID kind of new normal suggestions to people.